Ow!
Greetings YouTube, this is Dat Crash, better known as Brandon, and welcome to my 15th book review. And today's book review will be Aeon Legion, Book 1 Labyrinth, by one J.P. Beabien. Now, interestingly enough, his last name I always pronounce Beabien because, well, I'm from Louisiana, and I tend to pronounce words that look French in a French manner. Not just because I'm from Louisiana, but because also I took about 11 years of French. So even though I don't speak it like a native anymore, I can still speak it fairly well, and I have a tendency to pronounce French words with the French pronunciation. It's just something that kind of developed over time. But his last name is actually pronounced Beabien. And that just kind of surprised me a little bit. It's just one of those little things. So anyway, to start, I'm not usually a fan of stories that involve time travel. There are only a handful of science fiction stories that involve time travel that really interested me, like The Terminator, and maybe Quantum Leap, which happens to be one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and also a lesser-known TV show that aired in syndication back in the early 90s called Time Tracks, about a cop from the future sent back to our present, which was back then 1993. He was from 2193, to capture criminals that were sent back in time to his time. That one managed to get around the more migraine-inducing elements of time travel by saying that he didn't actually go into the past, but rather into a parallel universe, which was our own, that was just 200 years out of sync with his. This is the reason why when he did things in our time that would have changed things in his future, it didn't change anything, which I didn't understand at the time. But as I watched the series later on through some episodes that I found through alternative means, shall we say, I didn't realize that until then. I was still, let me see, how old was I at the time? It was 1993. I was like 15 or 16 years old when the show had come out, so I guess I didn't pay attention to that portion of it, or maybe I just didn't understand dimensional physics all that well. Probably the latter. But I digress. So, what I'm trying to say is, the book, I want to say show, the book didn't really strike me as something I really wanted to read at first, simply for the fact that I realized that time travel was a big part of the plot, or at least it was centered around elements of time travel. But Beabien kind of won me over, considering he has a very popular YouTube channel called Terrible Writing Advice. For people like me who are writers, I'm a published writer, but for even published writers, this channel does a great job of helping writers to understand what to do by kind of showing them in a snarky, ironic manner what not to do. It's something you got to kind of experience for yourself, and I highly recommend anyone who even has the slightest bit of interest in the writing craft to check out. It's very helpful advice and done in a hilarious manner. And the man is a man of many talents, it appears, looking at his terrible writing advice videos. And he, of course, uses videos from time to time as a slight shameless plug for his book, which is how I learned about it. And how I kind of learned about other authors, too, which I may go into at a later point in time. I'm going to be releasing more book reviews as time goes by, and also, of course, videos that expand upon the writing craft a little bit as I get inspired to do them. So, like I said, and I keep veering off the topic. Aeon Legion was a book that it just took me a while to come to. Just like I said, I'm just not all that interested in sci-fi stories that involve time travel. And to borrow a quote from Star Trek, temporal physics always gives me a headache. But I decided to go ahead and bite the bullet because I found the plot blurb to be sort of interesting. I was kind of wondering what was awaiting me and what was in store for me there, especially after watching a lot of Beabien's terrible writing advice videos. And the first thing that hit me when I started reading is that it just kind of takes all the confusing aspects of time travel and doesn't really bother with them. rather the story is an epic coming-of-age tale. And so the majority of the tale, it takes place in a city called the Saturn City, or the city of Saturn. It's a civilization that exists in some realm called the Edge of Time, where you can actually see the beginning and end of time, and every star that exists, has existed, or ever will exist in the universe. And this, in the Edge of Time, the city of Saturn has an organization called the Aeon Legion that polices all of time travel. They're pretty much basically time cops in a sense, but more in a superhero medieval almost fashion. And so and also you learn that time machines are actually a fairly common invention after a certain point in a timeline's history. You also find out that there are multiple timelines. I'll go into that later. So the Aeon Legion, with the help of the Sibyls, which are a group of precognizant individuals that can sense crimes before they're committed, they prevent various incursions and alterations of time that can cause a devastating type of event called a temporal crash, where basically time simply breaks down. And well, when you look at the map of time that Beabien provides at the beginning of the book, you see some areas and some timelines where time has basically crashed. And also like the idea of the Sibyl, by the way, being sort of something like the precogs that in Minority Report, if anybody remembers that movie. So they enforce the temporal accords, which are a set of laws that govern what is and is not permissible for time travel, and they also punish those who attempt to use time travel for their own personal greedy means. I mean, there's a difference between somebody going back in time, of course, to just observe, and somebody going back in time with the intent of taking artifacts back to their time, especially if they go into the future, and or taking bringing something into that time period in order to change, going back into the past and bringing something there to change history. And so that's where the Aeon Legion steps in. The precogs sense that someone's going to do that, and they go in and stop them. And the way they do this, they have incredibly advanced technology called singularity tech, which I will talk about later on in this review. And so, plot-wise, the story is a fairly straightforward one. Of a an epic coming-of-age tale, more or less, that also has nods to the hero's journey monomyth type thing, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So it starts off in our time, in our present day, and it opens up with something really kind of exciting. The main character, a girl named Tara Mason from our own time, is in the library where suddenly a bunch of Nazis appear with the intent on retrieving an artifact from her time, and they're led by a guy named Commander Hans Speer, who's the guy who invented this time gate to bring him back to bring him forward to our particular time. And the interesting thing about this villain is that he's unusually polite and kind and gentlemanly, very, very un-Nazi-like, which is kind of strange. As a matter of fact, Speer, as the story progresses, becomes a very interesting villain who I have only seen anything even remotely like in Kevin J. Anderson's Saga of the Seven Sons, and if I get back to that, I'll explain why. So anyway, Speer comes to Tara's time to retrieve a particular artifact, but of course is thwarted by Alia, a member of the Aeon Legion that we spoke of, and pretty much she thoroughly spanks the entire division and sends them back through the time gate with their tail between their legs. And during this little kerfuffle, she also witnesses Tara commit an act of bravery, which moves her to select Tara to be her squire. In other words, someone who she would put under her own training as a member of the Aeon Legion. And so she comes to Tara and pretty much kind of talks her into joining. And that is probably one of the funnier moments of the book, because it utilizes the time manipulation technology that the Aeon Legion has in a very funny part of the conversation. I'm not going to give that away. I'm going to try to be as spoiler-free as possible for this, except for just maybe describing some of the main things that happen in the story, but not really the outcome. And like I said, that part was pretty hilarious, and it was also pretty amazing to see what the Aeon Legion can do with time. And let me see. But after she's convinced to join the Aeon Legion, you realize really fast that that is pretty much the only part of the book where things are even remotely easy. Afterwards, everything becomes basically a trek through hell, just to gain respect, skill, and even just the honor of joining the Aeon Legion and becoming a full Legionnaire. See, Terra is from a point in history of relative peace and prosperity and security. And then she's just dropped like a babe in the woods into the midst of the Sea of Saturn, into the middle of a civilization that's pretty much beyond anything she's ever imagined, even anything I've ever imagined. And then being brought into the most grueling training of her life alongside other recruits that are composed of people who are warriors and fighters from various points in the past, present, and future, and other timelines as well. Few, especially Terra, fully know what awaits them as the trainees in the Aeon Legion's regimen, where basically failure means just washing out of the program. And I'm talking about any small failure. There are times where just her success ends up resting on a razor's edge. And so Terra is pretty much the quintessential outsider and an underdog, outclassed among all these just battle-hardened fighters from all these differing times of war. And so she's facing insurmountable odds that just push her courage, strength, and determination just to their absolute limit. And also she ends up receiving certain revelations as the story progresses that manage to shake her faith in the very organization that she wants so badly to be a part of. Because for the first time in her life, she truly wants something. Because Terra starts off as, as just controlled by her fears and even just lazy, very little motivation whatsoever, never really knowing what she wants to do or be in her life. And this is the first time in her life that she wants something. She finds something worth wanting to be. Alia is someone she looks up to and wants to be what she is. And seeing what the Aeon Legion is and stands for, I can see why she would want something like that. I sure as hell wouldn't be able to last that kind of training. But so I gotta give to to Terra what she goes through. And if I mentioned Alia as the main character by accident, I meant Terra. So if I get those two confused on occasion, please forgive me. So, the short version of this is just the question: did I like it? Well, the answer is, oh yes, absolutely. I really liked this book. Here's a long version. And like I said, it gets a tiny bit spoilery, nothing major, just general descriptions of things. But I don't get into a whole lot of specifics. So, first I want to say that when I decide on whether or not a given book is going to be something I'm going to be interested in, I often look to the number of positive reviews, as I'm sure that many of you book readers out there do. And I take the time to peruse a few, maybe, and try to avoid, any of the spoilers that are dropped, by those who are going to be less discreet. But then when it comes to review the book, I see what both supporters and detractors have to say about it. And that helps to give me clarity from some of the complaints about the negative views and all. So, Aeon Legion is a story where I found that the inside of negative reviewers, it kind of came in handy to generate my opinion in a manner. It came out kind of better than even my own positive opinions did. But it's not to say that I didn't like the book. No, I liked the book. But once again, I digress. Let's get into the meat of things. So, during the time that I read the story, one thing really stood out the most, and that it was Beabien was the kind of writer that likes to just subvert the reader's expectations. That's what I saw, time and time again, is the subversion of the expectations. You expect it this way, and he does this way, and then you expect things to happen one way, and he does it another way. And this wasn't the big disappointing things that of course, the last Star Wars movie, that happened in the last Star Wars movie. And mind you, I didn't hate the last Star Wars movie, but I completely sympathize with people who hated it. So don't jump down my gullet, either side. So anyway, what Beabien is doing though, he's trying to subvert the reader's expectations, and especially when it comes to tropes. And so he's kind of being true to some of the things he's done in his terrible writing advice, videos, where he talks about tropes and is basically trying to say, the way you approach a trope is to try to do it in a unique way, and he does. He either does it in a very unique way or completely subverts your expectations, and he does it time and time and time again. And in the Aeon Legion, he goes above and beyond to avoid most of just what the reader would expect from a coming-of-age young adult novel. Tara starts off, like I said, she's lazy, indecisive, and full of fear, but in her conversation with Alia, the funny part I was talking about, she's quickly won over, and then Beabien, after this point, just starts avoiding any and all plot and narrative conventions that would make her out to be, the chosen one, as a lot of these sort of archetypal stories do. Like I said, he goes out of his way to do it. The story goes out of its way to do it in order just to kill that notion in every way you can possibly think. Just from reviews on her poor physical shape, to her shortcomings among her peers in the Legion, who tend to be more aggressive and even far more talented, and to the dismissive nature of just nearly everyone around her. And that was kind of a frustration for me, reading just how these people were competing so hard against each other, to the point where you kind of wonder, if Tara was really going to make any friends. So, even the very ones who would have the greatest reason to mark her as any kind of fated hero, that even that was pushing aside the whole thing of, she's the chosen one, Beabien went out of his way to say, no, this is not about her being the chosen one. And it actually works out in the story as you read it further. So, so the reader quickly learns, like I said, that Tara is about as far from any chosen one as she can be. But like I said, it works to the story's credit in this is one way, in that her shortcomings and her difficulties, they make every one of her successes in the story just something that you cherish. When she succeeded and managed to get past over one hurdle and another, I found myself just like feeling a thrill of excitement, wanting to see what was going to happen next, just maybe fist pounding or just going, yes, or great, oh, good girl, yeah, So, and I was really genuinely happy for her. I never felt such a thrill of excitement in seeing a character succeed, against the impossible odds in a really long time. You know how in a lot of stories where you read that it's going to be one of those kinds of stories where you see the main character succeeding over impossible odds, and so you come to expect it? Well, even though we know that this is going to be that kind of a story, seeing and experiencing Tara succeeding is a unique experience, just in the respect of how much of an underdog she is in the beginning of the story. I mean, I wish I could go into more detail, but at the risk of spoiling the story, I'm not going to do that. But you will see what kind of obstacles face her as the story progresses, if you should choose to read this book. So, like I said, it all works to the story's credit. Her shortcomings, her difficulties, make every one of her successes in the story something you can really cherish. And speaking of just journeys in the story, like I said before, Aeon Legion is one of those hero's journey tales. But like I said, Beabien persistently avoids all the tropes and the traps to make, and so it makes it anything but conventional. In addition to Tara's shortcomings, the company she keeps, her peers, or the people she's kind of forced into in the Legion, the company she's forced into in the Legion, it's hardly the standard fare for any kind of typical epic adventure. there are three mainstay characters in the story during her training. There's this medieval knight named Roland, a Japanese warrior named Hikari, and a Turkish soldier slash scholar named Zaid. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And two of these three were just the antithesis of an archetype of their characters. Roland, rather than being noble and chivalrous and courageous, he was deceptive and manipulative and just downright lazy. He joined the Aeon Legion specifically to become immortal, because some about the time manipulation technology basically can prevent you from aging. And then Hikari, though you would think that she's just like something like an honorable samurai or something like that. No, she detests any concept of honor. We talk to her about honor. You want to piss her off? Start talking about honor. She hates it. And not only that, she's also selfish and just brutal against all of her fellow recruits. She enjoys beating the tar out of them in sparring matches, and especially Terra. They become the bane of Terra's existence at first, and Terra's just the recipient of just numerous lumpings, just in almost one-sided sparring matches with especially with Hikari. But there is an advantage that Terra does have against Hikari, and I will let you read about that. It's actually kind of cool what happens. It's only Zaid who at first just doesn't really come off as an archetype of anything. He's the one who ends up becoming a mentor, and the first person in that book who forges a true rapport and even a friendship with Terra, and whom Terra starts to learn to trust. Well, someone outside of maybe Alia, who even she doesn't end up seeming all that trustworthy after just dropping her, kind of, like I said, just knowing nothing into the midst of everything and having to learn how to make her way around the city and and get into the Aeon Legion itself. But again, when it comes to Alia, there's a reason she does that. The good thing is that these anti-tropes, I guess they are subversions of expectations that Beabien does. They're never without reason, and they're never without method. There's always method to his proverbial madness. So, anyway, I'm saying that Zaid ends up becoming the person who becomes a mentor and someone who Terra ends up learning to trust, being unable to rely on even Alia, like I just said. Even the head of the academy, Praetor Lycus Cerberus, that's his name, he comes off as almost sadistic, and he's actually downright scary. There are times I was just kind of wondering, what on earth is this guy's game? And he would come off, he like I said, he comes off as almost sadistic if it weren't for the preludes to each chapter that manifest themselves as sort of entries into diaries, normally by Cerberus. Then you start getting a glimpse into his true motives. He's a very interesting character. The less said about him, the better. But he was quite surprising as a character. So, with that in mind, you start realizing also that through the story's progression, you start to see the reasons for the character's behavior, and the readers going to be made aware that all these characters are actually just wearing masks. I'm not going to go into detail about that. But they do this, hiding their deepest hearts. And throughout this time, Terra begins to learn and understand these folks better all throughout the training, which culminates in this grand crucible called the Labyrinth, where every recruit's skills and techniques that they've learned up to that point are tested in multiple challenges where there is a very real threat to their lives. Some recruits do not make it through alive. So, yeah, to say the story was interesting, that's an understatement. But it's, of course, not just for this reason alone that, Aeon Legion easily became probably a favorite book of mine. Beabien's skill and characterization and storytelling is one, and, of course, most of you who've been keeping up with my book reviews on YouTube will probably figure out what the second part is. Of course, world building. I loves me some world building. So, and of course, the civilization of Saturn City has this just in spades. chiefly expressed in this ubiquitous time manipulation technology they have. That it allows a plethora of both conventional and just military applications. And they have this thing where you can store instances of yourself in a time frame and just reset yourself in case you are severely injured. Now, it does have its limits. There's certain types of injuries that, well, they can be healed, but with a particular side effect that is very, very, very bad. And also, you can use these instances to even generate food out of out of thin air. So basically, with this singularity tech, Saturn City is a post-scarcity society. Basically, it's a society that doesn't know poverty, and everyone has all all will ever need. And so, in that way, it's this beautiful utopia where everyone has what they need, and no one ever ages. And so like I said, they use this through singularity technology. It controls time in that regards. But of course, you want to see the most dazzling display of their tech is in the hands of the Aeon Legion. And they use their tech to do things like slow down, freeze, time, speed it up as an accelerant for both your thoughts and your actions. And they even use time distortions as a shield against non-singularity weapons. Even the Ion Edge, which is the Legionnaire's primary weapon, they uses various types of time distortions in order to make it both indestructible and deadly. You can cut through literally anything and cannot be destroyed. However, their technology, combined with their self-imposed position as the guardians of time, and like I said, the Saturnians, as they call themselves, are kind of like the Time Lords from Doctor Who, but not nearly as douchey. And of course, it's earned them a lot of enemies. They're rogue time travelers, like I said, that want to time travel for their own personal gain. They're empires that have developed on the edge of time as well. They've developed time travel technology similar to, singularity technology similar to the Saturnians. There are temporal anomalies that become rapidly evolving Lovecraftian temporal aberrations. And then there's something called the Faceless, which are these things that manifest entropy. They come from a region called the End of Time. You see, when in the city of Saturn, being on the edge of time, they see all of time as the various timelines, and then a bright point called the beginning of time, and a dark mass called the end of time, to which all time feeds. But things on the edge of the end of time become more and more distorted and messed up, and that's where the Faceless come from. Now, in the book, I will just say this: we don't get to experience the Faceless, at least not yet. But from how they've been described in the book, they're pretty horrifying things. And Beabien only describes these things, like I said, to a greater or lesser degree of clarity in the general story, but he has a handy glossary at the end of the book that describes a lot of the terminology in these beings, organizations, creatures, even the organization of the Ion Legion, all in really good detail. And even, like I said, they have a map of time at the very beginning of the book, so you can see all the different timelines that branch out. Like I said, time is not just a linear thing. It shows that it branches off in different alternate histories, and in some histories that are broken down because of those terrible events called temporal crashes, which the Aeon Legion is set up to try to prevent. So, and you do see these things, like I said, in the story, usually in the narrative and dialogue that, well, not usually, but of course, in the narrative and dialogue, through references to events that have either never happened in our own timeline, or talking about events that have yet to happen. And even you get to experience one of these things in a really terrifying encounter during Terra's trek through the titular labyrinth. And the story, this one is supposed to be the first in a slated series, and it has an intriguing epilogue that hints of the further trials to come for Terra. And so it can't help but just generate an interest in what's going to happen next to the reader. And it's the kind of thing I absolutely like. So as you can see, this story does a great job with world building. I loves me some world building. You guys know that. But of course, Ion Legion. Oh, I'm very sorry. Let me backtrack just a tad because I wanted to touch on one little thing about the villain in the story. I wrote a typed out review which I posted on my blog, which I will have a link to in the doobly-doo. I'd forgotten to mention this in my blog, and I would be remiss if I did not mention this villain in my video review or audio review, as the case may be. Hans Spear is, like I said, he's very un-Nazi like Nazi. The interesting thing is this: I have only seen villains that are focused on in this manner from only one other writer, and that is Kevin J. Anderson. Actually, I'm sorry, two other writers. Brandon Sanderson, because in his book Elantris he had villains that were like this. Kevin J. Anderson always had a really good grasp of characterization. I don't think I've ever read an author that had such a good grasp of characterization as he does, or maybe a few other authors. One thing that always stood out were his villains, because he had the ability to get into the heads of his villains and help people to realize why villains never see themselves as villains. It's an old saying. The people who history vilifies, if you were to talk to them, they never saw themselves as villains. Even Hitler would probably have told you that he was just doing what he thought was best for the German people. Even Speer, being one of these Nazis, thought that was the case, and thought that he was doing what was best for his people by trying to use time travel to do what he wanted to do. And you'll see what his goal is as the story progresses. I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. I just wish I could remember the quote that Alia told Tara in the book, and right now it is escaping me, but it was probably one of the best definitions of how villains see things. So, like I said, that was just something I really felt like I needed to say. And I have to give Beabien mad kudos for making a very excellent villain, personality-wise. Now, we get to the less pleasant aspects of the story. So, Ion Legion, of course, like I said, it's not a perfect work. And there's going to be a few bumps in the road that Beabien hits, which, it didn't impede my enjoying personally. Some readers might find it, a bit of a problem for their enjoyment. As I mentioned in the beginning, I allow both positive and negative reviews. It helped me to reflect on various pros and cons in the book. And one element that stood out to me on the proverbial downside was Beabien's avoidance of tropes. Now, I admit, I mentioned this in a positive way, but there's also a negative way of looking at this. As much as I praised his subversion of all those expectations, there's going to be a lot of readers who thrive on these expectations. They're going to find the story's constant deviations, from these certain tried and true paths to be an annoyance. And Beabien avoids tropes, and he does it with the zeal of a germaphobe who's trying to disinfect his entire house. And like I said, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. That's flip of coin. It's how you view things. It's gonna result in how you see it. Another issue that I believe that anyone, including myself, would find annoying is the presence of, generally more typos and grammatical errors than one would expect in a mainstream published novel. Now, this isn't to say that the book is just like full of them. It's not. You only see it occasionally, but you're gonna run into them from time to time. And even for me, they kind of disrupted immersion from time to time. But for me, those aren't big deal breakers. I mean, one of the best books I have ever read, and I will refer you to my review of The Shattered Sky by Paul Lucas. It had typos in it, popping up from time to time. And it was the same thing with me. They weren't like all over the place. It was just something you ran into here and there. They did happen a bit more often near the end of the book. But it wasn't a deal breaker for me, because the story was still so engaging. But there are going to be some people I know who are going to really be turned off by that. And as someone who's read a lot of self-published works, you see these issues that you see them all the time, and that's something to be expected. But then again, I can't sit here and give him a complete pass on this, because I have read other self-published works that have few to no typos that I've been able to see. One of them that comes to mind is the Samantha Moon Vampire for Hire Samantha Moon series by J.R. Rain. I don't recall seeing any kinds of typos in those books. So I think that writers who decide to self-publish need to try to hold themselves to a very high standard and make sure they get the best editors that they can for their projects, so that they don't come off looking a bit more elementary than their mainstream counterparts. And like I said, that's just a second thing. And then finally, there's one last thing. I'm forced to admit that the fact that so many of these secondary characters, with the exception of a few, seem either dismissive or outright unlikable at first. Maybe with the exception of Roland, I kind of found him hilarious, because how he got on Tara's nerves, but even I just kind of saw right through that. And this might, and with some of the things he did, I was just thinking how Tara reacted. I was like, why are you even worried about this, lady? Just do your thing, let him is. Now, this might be a turn-off for readers who like their stories with far more characters to empathize with or relate to than just Tara. And one more thing about Tara is that Beabien is kind of slim on any description of what she looks like, except for maybe her figure, because of how she talks about how out of shape she looks, and then nearing the end of the story, how much slimmer and how her posture is better and everything like that. But other than that, you don't really get much of a description of what she looks like. And like I said, that can work to an advantage if it leaves room for just the story to progress and not have a character that is maybe really vain. And then of course it could and also some readers find it easier to put yourself in the place of that character. I know, and this is going to be a terrible example, but admittedly it's true. That's why Stephanie Meyer did what she did with Bella in the Twilight books. She did not give much of a description of Bella, and Bella had very little personality, though, which Meyer was saying was the reason why she did it that way, was so that the reader could put themselves in Bella's place. But Bella is not a very well thought out character. Tara is far different. Tara has genuine wants, genuine desires, genuine past and history, which they do go into in a brief flashback in the story, which feels a little out of place personally. And so so she's a far better made character than Bella ever could have imagined herself to be. So but that's really the only thing that I have there, a bit of a problem I have there. So like I said, you have characters that may come off at first as very unlikable. I know Hikari definitely was. I just kind of wanted so bad to see her get taken down a peg. Whereas, like I said, Roland kind of made me laugh. Others might find Roland to be just a world-class jerk. And I know that some readers don't like characters that come off as unlikable at first. Even if you try to, bring up things in the story where that will allude to that person becoming better as time goes by. I know that was a chief worry with me with a character that I have designed in a book that I'm currently writing called The Tribute. It's the main character is a prince named Vorin, who is just basically a big jerk. And a lot of people who read the first few chapters of the book say, well, man, I'm just really not liking Vorin. I hope things change with him. And that's kind of one of the central things of how the story turns out. But enough about me. So, depending on how you view the issues that I brought up, the negative aspects of the story, you might see them as nitpicks, or you might see them as deal breakers. Your mileage may vary, but I just wanted to kind of lay that out for any potential readers. And so, wrapping things up, I gotta say that Aeon Legion it's fascinating. It's engaging. It's for a first outing for Beabien, definitely, and it really portrays a good grasp of the writing craft, and in his YouTube series matched only by his skill as an author. He really knows how to just weave an amazing world and with interesting characters and avoid tropes that would create a pitfall into anything even just resembling mediocrity. The guy certainly grabbed my attention. Aeon Legion has a sympathetic heroine with just massive obstacles to overcome, and a path that leads her to discover things about herself, her true self, in just this world beyond imagination. And so it made Aeon Legion just an unforgettable tale for me that I was just very happy to have picked up. I'm actually considering getting a paperback version of the book. That's how much I liked it. Because to have a book that has a map inside, and I love maps, by the way. If anybody ever comes to my DeviantArt page, and I do have a DeviantArt page, I'll try to remember to leave a link down in the doobly-doo for you. But I have a section where I've just collected a ton of maps, also for that in my other DeviantArt page for Wild Space Saga, which I'll talk about at a later time. So yeah, I'm going to get that book in paperback just to have all the cool stuff with it that I don't have to flip through my Kindle to see. I give him mad kudos on all this. Beabien, if you ask me, is an author to watch. This is his first book. He's still currently working on the second one, which I cannot wait for, because I really want to dive back into this amazing world, and I want to experience Terra's further adventures in the Aeon Legion. I want to see where this takes her, and especially with how this book ended and the big twist near the end. I'm really wondering what's going to happen now, and where everything is headed. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Aeon Legion. I mean, scale of 1 to 10, I give it a solid 8.5. Excellent book. Definitely recommended. I will have information on how you can get the book down in the doobly-doo. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Noble. And it's available for Kobo. And I think that's all I have to say about that, guys. I'm going to be doing more videos on book reviews and writing. I've already got an idea of what I want to do for my first video about being a writer. Really, it's going to be more of an anecdotal thing where I talk about an experience that recently happened to me, and it's going to be a nice lead into what I want to say, even though I know other writers have said these things before, maybe even better than I will, but I still want to help people to check it out. And of course, I am a writer. I am an author. I have 6 books written. I will have a link down in the doobly-doo to my Amazon page where you can see all of my works. If anything tickles your pickle, hey, please give it a read. All I ask if you pick up any of my books is that you leave a review. Even if you didn't like it, leave a review. It means a lot to me. Hey, even if you didn't like it, at least it helps me to understand what I might need to do better. Just hope you don't get trollish about it. And of course, comment, rate, subscribe down below. As always, keep it civil. Trolls will be destroyed. So thank you very much for listening to my book review, everyone. And once again, this is Dat Crash, better known as Brandon. And as always, stay lucky and stay blessed. Take care.